We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The blue glow of the computer screen cast harsh shadows across Alexander Lee's angular features as he reviewed the quarterly reports. Outside his home office window, rain pelted against the glass, creating a rhythmic backdrop to his late-night work session. The mansion felt empty, despite Gloria being home, or at least, claiming to be. His mouse hovered over the next spreadsheet when a notification slid onto his screen. Thomas Reed, his PI, had finally sent his weekly report. Alexander's jaw tightened, but his hand remained steady as he opened the message. The photos appeared one by one. Gloria's silver Mercedes pulling into the Constellation Hotel's parking garage. Timestamp, 7:45 p.m., Wednesday. Another photo showed her emerging from the elevator 40 minutes later, her black cocktail dress replaced by a red one she claimed was at the dry cleaners. The final image made his fingers curl into a fist. Russell Maxwell, his business partner, following her out 5 minutes later, adjusting his tie. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Mr. Lee? Maria, their housekeeper, stood in the doorway. Mrs. Lee called. She says her dinner with Ms. or is running late. She won't be home until 11. Alexander checked his watch. 9:45 p.m. The same time Gloria always called on Wednesdays. Thank you, Maria. You can head home for the night. After Maria left, Alexander opened his safe and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. Inside, he documented everything. Gloria's changing passwords, her new gym membership at a club across town, the sudden interest in book club meetings that never seemed to have any books involved. He added tonight's alibi to the growing list. His phone buzzed, a text from Jonathan Griffith, his corporate lawyer and oldest friend. Got your message. Free for breakfast tomorrow? That diner on 7th? Alexander typed back, 7 a.m. Bring everything you have on Russell's Singapore project. He closed his laptop and walked to the window, watching the rain transform the manicured garden into a blur of shadows. 8 years of partnership with Russell, building Lee and Maxwell Enterprises from a startup to a corporation worth billions. 8 years of trust, demolished by a hotel room keycard and a red dress. The front door opened downstairs, followed by the click of heels on marble. Gloria's laugh echoed through the house, that practiced, theatrical laugh she'd perfected at charity galas. Alexander remained still, listening to her movements. Purse on the console table, heels kicked off, the rustle of her coat. Alex? Her voice carried up the stairs. You still working, darling? He turned, composing his features into a mask of mild interest. Just finishing up. How was dinner with Kate? Gloria appeared in the doorway, her blonde hair slightly damp from the rain. The red dress was nowhere to be seen. Oh, you know Kate. 3 glasses of wine and suddenly she's spilling all her dating drama. She walked over and kissed his cheek. Her expensive perfume mixed with a familiar cologne he'd noticed on Russell during their last board meeting. You work too hard, honey. Come to bed. In a bit. Need to review these reports for tomorrow's meeting. She pouted playfully. The company would collapse without you, wouldn't it? Her phone buzzed in her purse. She glanced at it, her expression flickering for a moment before she tucked it away. Don't stay up too late. After she left, Alexander returned to his desk and opened a new email to Thomas Reed. Continue surveillance. Focus on the financial angle. I want to know every restaurant bill, every hotel charge, every gift purchased. And get me everything you can on Russell's personal accounts. He sent the email and leaned back in his chair, remembering the day he'd introduced Russell to Gloria at the company's 5th anniversary party. Russell had been charming, charismatic, everything Alexander knew his wife appreciated. Now he wondered if that night had been the beginning, if every laugh and touch had been laying groundwork for betrayal. The rain intensified outside, drowning out the sound of Gloria's shower running upstairs. Alexander pulled up the company's organizational chart on his screen, studying the names and connections. Russell might have Gloria, but Alexander had spent years building something far more valuable. A network of loyal employees, board members who trusted his judgment, and enough documentation of Russell's recent questionable decisions to bury him professionally. He opened his phone and scrolled through his recent calls until he found Marcy King's number. The CFO had been raising concerns about Russell's financial decisions for months. Tomorrow's breakfast with Jonathan would be the first move, but Marcy would be essential for what came next. A text notification lit up his screen. Russell, drinks tomorrow? Need to discuss the Singapore expansion. Alexander's lips curved into a cold smile as he typed back. Can't tomorrow. Breakfast meeting with Jonathan. Rain check? He shut down his computer and gathered his papers, listening to Gloria's movements in their bedroom above. Let her think she was clever, that her excuses and stolen moments were going unnoticed. Alexander had learned long ago that revenge, like success, required patience, precision, and above all, the ability to see 10 moves ahead while your opponent was still playing checkers. Tomorrow, he would begin positioning his pieces. But tonight, he would go upstairs and play the role of the devoted, unsuspecting husband one last time. After all, the best victories were the ones your opponents never saw coming until it was too late. The corner cafe on 7th Street was nearly empty at 6:55 a.m. when Alexander claimed his usual booth in the back. Janet, the elderly waitress who'd been serving him breakfast for 15 years, brought his black coffee without being asked. The usual, Mr. Lee? Thanks, Janet. Make it 2, Jonathan's joining me. She nodded, glancing at the stack of folders he'd placed on the table. Looks like serious business today. Always is. He offered a rare smile that made the corners of his eyes crinkle. Jonathan Griffith arrived 5 minutes later, his suit slightly rumpled from what Alexander suspected was another late night at the office. The lawyer's briefcase bulged with documents as he slid into the booth. You look like hell, Alexander commented, pushing a coffee cup toward his friend. Spent all night going through Russell's Singapore files. Jonathan took a long drink of coffee. It's worse than we thought, Alex. The whole project is built on speculation and creative accounting. Janet returned with their plates, egg white omelets with wheat toast, a concession to their wives' ongoing health kick. Alexander waited until she was out of earshot before speaking. Show me everything. Jonathan pulled out a series of reports, spreading them across the table between bites of toast. He's been inflating projected returns, using outdated market analysis to justify the investment. But here's where it gets interesting. Look at the subsidiary company handling the local contracts. Alexander studied the document, his fork paused halfway to his mouth. Maxwell Pacific Holdings? When did he set this up? 3 months ago. Right around the time your wife started having her weekly dinner dates with Kate Orr. Jonathan's tone was carefully neutral. The company's registered in Singapore, but the beneficial ownership structure is buried under layers of shell corporations. He's been funneling development fees through it, marking up costs by 30%. The board doesn't know? Not yet, but Randall Ramsey's been asking questions. You know how thorough he is with the audit committee reports? Alexander nodded slowly, remembering Randall's support when he'd first proposed the merger that created Lee and Maxwell Enterprises. What about Stephanie? Does Russell's wife suspect anything? She's been too focused on her foundation's annual gala. Jonathan hesitated. There's something else. My new girlfriend, Kate. Kate Orr. Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. Gloria's friend? Started seeing her a few weeks ago. She mentioned something interesting over dinner last night. Apparently, Gloria's been asking about divorce lawyers. Specifically, ones who handle high-net-worth cases. The corners of Alexander's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. Has she? Kate thinks she's planning to leave you, Alex. She and Russell have been meeting at the Constellation Hotel every Wednesday for the past 3 months. Alexander's voice remained steady. I know. Jonathan stared at him. How long have you? Long enough. Alexander pulled out his phone and showed Jonathan the PI's photos. I needed to be certain before making any moves. Now I am. What's your play? First, we need Marcy King's cooperation. As CFO, her concerns about the Singapore project will carry weight with the board. Alexander took a sip of coffee. Then we start quietly approaching other board members. Randall's questions about the audit were perfect timing. And Gloria? Let her think she's winning. Alexander's eyes hardened. She wants to leave? Fine. But it'll be on my terms, not hers. Janet appeared with the coffee pot. Refill, gentlemen? Please. Alexander waited until she left again. How quickly can you freeze Russell's access to the corporate accounts? With enough evidence of mismanagement? 24 hours. But we'd need Marcy's sign-off. Alexander checked his watch. She'll be in her office by now. Tell her I'd like to meet for lunch. That new place near the office she's been wanting to try. He gathered the documents, his movements precise and controlled. One more thing. I need you to start divorce proceedings quietly. But don't file anything yet. Alex. Jonathan leaned forward. Are you sure about this? Once we start, there's no going back. Alexander placed several bills on the table, enough to cover their breakfast and leave Janet a generous tip. Russell brought this on himself. He could have had any woman in the city, but he chose my wife. Now he'll lose everything. His company, his reputation, his marriage. And Gloria? A cold smile played at the corners of his mouth. She'll learn that betrayal has consequences. He stood, straightening his tie. Send me the Singapore documents. I have a board meeting at 10, and I think it's time we started asking some very public questions about our expansion strategy. Jonathan watched his friend walk out of the cafe, remembering the quiet, ambitious young man he'd met in law school. That Alexander Lee had been driven but cautious. This one moved with the calculated precision of a predator who'd spotted his prey. The lawyer pulled out his phone and dialed Marcy King's number. Whatever was coming, Russell Maxwell and Gloria Edwards had no idea they'd already lost the game before it began. Marcy King's office occupied the corner of the 42nd floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline. When Alexander arrived at 1 p.m., she was already laying out documents on her conference table. I ordered lunch in, she said without looking up. Figured we'd need privacy for this conversation. Alexander studied the CFO. Her sharp features, the reading glasses perched on her nose, the methodical way she arranged the financial statements. Marcy had been with the company for 6 years, brought in specifically for her reputation as a financial watchdog. She'd never trusted Russell's charm. How bad is it? He asked, taking a seat. Marcy removed her glasses, rubbing the bridge of her nose. Remember when I flagged those irregularities in the Q2 reports? It goes deeper. She pushed several spreadsheets toward him. Russell's been manipulating project costs, creating ghost vendors, inflating consulting fees. The Singapore expansion is just the tip of the iceberg. A knock interrupted them, their lunch arriving on a cart. They waited until the delivery person left before continuing. Show me everything, Alexander said, unwrapping his sandwich. For the next hour, Marcy walked him through a web of financial misconduct. Shell companies, backdated contracts, suspicious wire transfers. With each revelation, Alexander's expression grew colder. The thing is, Marcy said, pulling up another document on her laptop, he's getting sloppy. Look at these expense reports: dinner for 2 at Lou Cirque, charge to business development. A suite at the Constellation Hotel, billed as client meetings. Every Wednesday? Alexander's voice was dangerously quiet. Marcy glanced at him sharply. Yes. Alex, is there something I should know? Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. A text from Gloria. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. Red heart. He showed Marcy the message, then pulled up the PI's photos. Her eyes widened as she flipped through them. That son of a bitch, she whispered. Alex, I'm so sorry. Don't be. You've just given me exactly what I needed. He leaned forward. The board meeting next month. I need you to present a full audit of the Singapore project. Every inconsistency, every questionable decision. They'll crucify him. That's the idea. Alexander's smile didn't reach his eyes. But first, I need you to meet someone. Right on cue, there was another knock. Jonathan entered, carrying his briefcase. Miss King, he nodded. I believe you have some documents for me? The next 2 hours were spent strategizing. Marcy provided copies of everything. Jonathan took notes, and Alexander watched the city lights come on as dusk fell. One last thing, he said as they were wrapping up. This stays between us. Russell thinks he's untouchable. Let's keep it that way. Back in his office, Alexander found a message from Stephanie Maxwell, Russell's wife. The annual charity gala for her foundation was next weekend. Would he be attending? He typed back a quick confirmation, then called Jonathan. How much does Stephanie know about the foundation's funding? Nothing yet. Why? Because Russell's been using company donations to fund it. Once the board sees Marcy's audit, the donations stop, Jonathan finished. Alex, that foundation is Stephanie's life's work. Then maybe we should make sure she has other funding options. Alexander paused. Set up a meeting with her next week. Tell her it's about increasing our support for the foundation. After hanging up, he stood at his window, watching the city below. Somewhere out there, his wife was with his business partner, both of them thinking they were clever enough to get away with their betrayal. His phone buzzed again. Another message from Gloria. Miss you? Having drinks with the girls. Don't work too hard. Alexander didn't bother responding. Instead, he opened his email and began drafting a message to Randall Ramsey about scheduling an emergency board meeting. The pieces were in place, the allies secured. Now it was just a matter of timing. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk, him and Russell at the company's launch, both smiling, arms around each other's shoulders. Tomorrow, he'd take it down. Tonight, he'd let it remind him that in business, as in marriage, trust was a weapon that cut deepest when betrayed. The city lights blurred as night fell, but Alexander remained at his window, planning his next moves. In the reflection, he saw not a betrayed husband, but a chess master, positioning his pieces for a game his opponents didn't even know they were playing. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Lee and Maxwell Enterprises boardroom, casting long shadows across the mahogany table. Board members filed in, their usual pre-meeting chatter subdued by the gravity of today's agenda. Russell Maxwell's proposed expansion plan. Russell stood at the head of the table, his confidence radiating as he distributed presentation folders. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm about to show you will transform our company's position in the Asian market. Alexander watched from his seat, noting how Russell's custom-tailored suit couldn't quite hide the slight tremor in his hands. Next to Alexander, Marcy King methodically arranged her own stack of documents, financial reports that told a very different story from Russell's glossy presentations. The Singapore project represents an unprecedented opportunity, Russell continued, clicking through his PowerPoint slides. Our initial investment of $500 million will yield returns of approximately 30% within the first 18 months. Randall Ramsey, the silver-haired head of the audit committee, adjusted his glasses. Those are ambitious projections, Russell. What's the basis for these numbers? Market analysis and preliminary agreements with local partners. Russell's smile remained fixed, but Alexander noticed a bead of sweat forming at his temple. The documentation is all in your packets. Interesting. Randall opened his folder, removing a separate set of papers. Because I'm looking at the latest market reports from Singapore, and they show a 15% decline in the exact sector you're targeting. The boardroom temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Russell's smile faltered. Those reports must be outdated. Our research shows. I'd like to hear from our CFO. Alexander's voice cut through the tension. All heads turned toward him, his first contribution to the meeting. Marcy, you've reviewed the financial implications? Marcy stood, her expression neutral as she connected her laptop to the projector. The screen filled with charts and figures that made several board members lean forward. My team has conducted a thorough analysis of the proposed expansion. Her laser pointer highlighted key numbers. The projected returns Mr. Maxwell presented assume a best-case scenario that contradicts current market trends. Moreover, we've identified several concerning patterns in the preliminary expenditures. Russell's face reddened. Those numbers are preliminary drafts. I can explain. Please do. Alexander interrupted smoothly. Particularly the $2.3 million in consulting fees paid to Maxwell Pacific Holdings, a company that, coincidentally, was registered in Singapore 3 months ago. The boardroom erupted in murmurs. Russell gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. That's a standard practice for international operations. We needed a local entity. A local entity that lists you as the sole beneficiary? Randall's question cut like a knife. That's not standard practice, Russell. That's a conflict of interest. Alexander. Russell turned to his partner, desperation creeping into his voice. You know how these deals work. Sometimes we need flexible arrangements to navigate local regulations. Alexander met his gaze coolly. Do those flexible arrangements usually include charging personal expenses to the company? Like weekly bookings at the Constellation Hotel? The room fell silent. Russell's face went from red to pale. Behind him, the presentation screen showed a detailed expense report with the hotel charges highlighted in red. I moved to suspend the expansion plan pending a full audit, Randall announced. And I suggest we freeze all discretionary spending until we understand the full scope of these irregularities. I second the motion, another board member called out. Russell looked around the table, finding no allies among the faces he'd so confidently addressed minutes earlier. This is ridiculous. Alexander, we built this company together. You can't seriously. All in favor? Alexander's voice remained steady. Hands rose around the table. Russell watched, his previous confidence crumbling as his empire began to slip through his fingers. Motion carried, Alexander declared. Marcy, please ensure all relevant accounts are secured by end of business today. Russell, you'll make yourself available for the audit team's questions. As the board members filed out, Russell remained rooted in place, staring at the damning figures still displayed on the screen. Alexander gathered his papers unhurriedly, feeling Russell's eyes boring into him. How long have you known? Russell's voice was barely above a whisper. Alexander paused at the door. Long enough to know that betrayal comes in many forms, Russell. Some professional. He turned, meeting his former friend's gaze. Some personal. The color drained from Russell's face as understanding dawned. Before he could respond, Alexander's phone buzzed. A text from Gloria. Lunch today? Miss you. Face blowing a kiss. You should answer that, Alexander said, noting how Russell's hand instinctively moved toward his own phone. It might be important. He left Russell in the boardroom, surrounded by the wreckage of his ambitions. In the elevator, Alexander sent a brief message to Jonathan. First piece has fallen. Proceed with Phase 2. Alexander's home office had become his sanctuary in recent weeks, a command center from which he orchestrated the gradual dismantling of Russell Maxwell's world. The evening light cast long shadows across his desk as he reviewed the latest reports from the audit team. The soft click of heels on hardwood announced Gloria's arrival before she appeared in his doorway, dressed in an outfit that cost more than most people's monthly salary. You've been impossible to reach all day. Alexander didn't look up from his papers. Board meeting ran long. Russell's expansion plan didn't go as smoothly as he expected. Gloria's carefully manicured fingers tensed around her phone. Oh, that's surprising. He seemed so confident about it. Confidence isn't always backed by competence. Alexander finally looked up, noting the slight smudge of her lipstick, recently reapplied. How was your day? Fine. Just lunch with Kate, then some shopping. She shifted her weight, a tell she developed when lying. You've been working so much lately. I barely see you anymore. The Singapore situation requires attention. He watched her reaction carefully. Russell's decisions have put the company in a difficult position. Gloria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face flickering with poorly concealed concern. I should let you work. Will you be up soon? Don't wait up. After she left, Alexander opened his laptop and clicked through the surveillance photos from that afternoon. Gloria and Russell at their usual table at Le Bernardin, his hand covering hers, their heads close together as they whispered urgently. The photos had arrived with a note from his PI. Maxwell looked agitated. Meeting lasted 47 minutes. His phone rang. Jonathan Griffith. The charity gala is this weekend, his lawyer reminded him. Stephanie Hopkins has confirmed your attendance. Perfect. And Gloria? Kate convinced her to come shopping for a new dress tomorrow. She'll make sure Gloria chooses something memorable. The weekend arrived with the kind of perfect weather that event planners dream about. The Hopkins Foundation's annual gala transformed the Metropolitan Museum's rooftop garden into a glittering showcase of New York's elite. Alexander arrived fashionably late, noting with satisfaction how Russell and Gloria carefully maintained their distance, stealing glances when they thought no one was watching. Stephanie Hopkins approached, radiant in midnight blue. Alexander, I'm so glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it. He kissed her cheek, aware of Russell watching from across the garden. Your foundation's work is remarkable, Stephanie. I've been reviewing the impact reports. You're too kind. She beamed. Though I admit, I'm a bit worried about next year's funding. Russell's been oddly evasive about the company's usual contribution. Has he? Alexander guided her to a quiet corner. Actually, I've been meaning to discuss that with you. Your educational initiatives particularly interest me. As they talked, he positioned them within earshot of where Gloria stood with Kate, pretending not to watch Russell's increasingly desperate attempts to network with board members who suddenly found their champagne glasses fascinating. Your work is impressive, Alexander said, raising his voice slightly. It would be a shame if anything threatened its funding. Stephanie's eyes widened slightly. What do you mean? Let's just say it's worth examining the foundation's financial structure. Perhaps over lunch next week? I may have some suggestions for ensuring its long-term stability. Later, as the party wound down, Alexander watched Gloria and Russell share a brief, tense conversation by the elevators. Their careful distance, the way Gloria's hands twisted her clutch, the slight shake of Russell's head, everything spoke of growing panic. His phone buzzed with a text from Marcy. Audit team found something big. Emergency board meeting called for Monday. Alexander smiled, sipping his champagne as he watched his wife and his business partner realize their carefully constructed world was beginning to crumble. The trap was nearly ready to spring, but timing, as always, was everything. Monday morning arrived with the kind of steady rain that turned Manhattan into a maze of black umbrellas and grinding traffic. Alexander sat in his office, watching water streak down the windows as reports from the audit team filled his inbox. A knock at his door revealed Jonathan, looking grimmer than usual. Russell's been trying to access restricted accounts all morning. 3 attempts to wire funds to Singapore. Desperate men make desperate choices. Alexander turned from the window. What's his financial position? Bad and getting worse. He's leveraged everything on this expansion. With the board freezing the project, Jonathan shook his head. He's starting to crack. As if on cue, Russell burst into the office, his usual polish replaced by barely contained panic. This has gone far enough, Alexander. Call off the audit. Sit down, Russell. Alexander's tone made it clear it wasn't a request. Jonathan, give us a minute. After Jonathan left, Russell paced like a caged animal. You're destroying everything we built. Over what? Some corporate disagreement. Is that what we're calling it? Alexander's voice remained deadly calm. This afternoon, the board will receive a complete report on your financial misconduct. Unauthorized accounts, embezzled funds, fake consultancy fees. He paused. Personal expenses charged to the company, including quite a few hotel rooms. Russell froze. Alex, don't. Alexander held up a hand. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? That I wouldn't notice my wife and my business partner stealing not just my money, but my time? My trust? It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. Alexander opened a folder on his desk. You've been sloppy, Russell. The affair made you careless. Now you'll lose everything. Your position, your reputation, your marriage. You can't prove anything. I already have. Alexander slid the folder across his desk. The board meeting is at 2. I suggest you use the time until then to consider your resignation. It might save what's left of your reputation. Russell snatched up the folder, his hands shaking as he flipped through the evidence of his downfall. Without another word, he stormed out. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls. By lunch, word had spread through the office that something big was happening. Alexander worked through his sandwich, reviewing his presentation for the board one final time. His phone lit up with a text from Gloria. We need to talk. Coming to your office. Minutes later, she appeared in his doorway, her usual confidence replaced by nervous energy. What have you done to Russell? I haven't done anything to Russell, Alexander replied calmly. His own actions have caught up with him. He's falling apart. He called me this morning, talking about leaving the country. And you're worried about your lover or your lifestyle? Alexander's question cut through her protests. Don't worry, Gloria. You'll both get exactly what you deserve. She stared at him, realization dawning. You knew. All this time, you knew about us. Did you really think you were that clever? The Wednesday night girls' dinners? The mysterious business meetings? He stood, walking to the window. You should head home, Gloria. Pack what matters to you. The next few days will be unpleasant. You can't do this to us. I already have. He turned back to her, his expression devoid of emotion. It's done, Gloria. All of it. She opened her mouth to argue, but his intercom buzzed. Mr. Lee? The board is assembling. Thank you, Sarah. He gathered his papers. You should go, Gloria. Your boyfriend has a rather important meeting to attend. Alexander walked into the boardroom at exactly 2 o'clock, followed by Marcy King and Jonathan. Russell sat alone at the far end of the table, his usual allies conspicuously absent. For the next hour, Marcy methodically presented their findings. Bank statements, wire transfers, falsified reports. The evidence mounted like a tsunami of paper, washing away Russell's last vestiges of dignity. When the final vote was called, it was unanimous. Russell Maxwell was removed from his position, his access to company resources terminated immediately. As security arrived to escort him from the building, he turned to Alexander one last time. You've won. Are you happy now? Alexander straightened his tie, a gesture so normal it seemed out of place in the wreckage of Russell's career. Happiness was never the goal, Russell. Justice was. Later that evening, Alexander sat in his home office, waiting. The house creaked with familiar sounds, Gloria's heels on the stairs, her nervous energy palpable even through the closed door. His phone buzzed one final time. A message from Jonathan. It's done. All accounts frozen, divorce papers ready. Alexander closed his laptop, listening to the sound of his wife's approaching footsteps. The trap had closed perfectly, but there was still one final scene to play out. Rain pelted against the windows of Alexander's study as Gloria paced before his desk, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floors. Her earlier bravado had begun to crack under his unervingly calm gaze. Why aren't you angry? She demanded again, her voice rising. I just told you I've been sleeping with your business partner for months. Alexander leaned back in his leather chair, studying her like a scientist observing a particularly predictable experiment. Tell me, Gloria, in all those months of sneaking around with Russell, did you ever wonder why it seemed so easy? Why I never questioned your Wednesday night dinners or your sudden interest in Kate's dating life? Color drained from her face. What do you mean? I mean, he said, opening his laptop, that Russell's about to learn an important lesson about mixing pleasure with business. He turned the screen toward her, displaying a series of documents that made her stumble back into a chair. That's impossible, she whispered. The board's emergency meeting concluded an hour ago. Russell's mismanagement and financial misconduct forced an emergency restructuring. A cold smile played at his lips. Your lover doesn't know it yet, but his company now belongs to me and his wife. Gloria's perfectly manicured nails dug into the armrests. You're lying. Russell would have told me if he was losing everything. If his Singapore project was a house of cards built on embezzled funds. Alexander stood, walking to his drink cart. Russell's too busy watching his empire crumble to warn his mistress. Would you like to see the termination papers? They're quite thorough. Termination? She shot to her feet. You can't fire him. He built this company with you. And then he betrayed everything we built. Alexander poured himself a scotch, not offering her one. The board voted unanimously. Russell will be removed as CEO tomorrow morning. Meanwhile, Stephanie has already filed for divorce. Armed with evidence of his financial misconduct, Gloria collapsed back into the chair, her arrogant facade crumbling completely. Stephanie knows? About the affair? Not yet. About Russell using company funds to finance your little rendezvous? About the shell companies and misappropriated assets? Oh yes. He took a measured sip. She's quite grateful for my help in protecting her foundation's interests. The foundation. Gloria's eyes widened as the full implications hit her. The charity gala. When you told Stephanie it would be a shame if anything threatened the funding, I was ensuring she understood her options. Alexander's phone buzzed, a message from Jonathan confirming the final preparations. Just as I'm ensuring you understand yours. Gloria straightened, desperation replacing shock. Alex, please. We can work through this. I made a terrible mistake, but… Save your performance, he cut her off. I've watched you play the devoted wife for months. It's not convincing anymore. You cold-hearted bastard. Her voice turned venomous. You set us up. All those business meetings, the late nights at the office. You were orchestrating this. No, Gloria. You and Russell orchestrated your own downfall. I simply made sure you had enough rope to hang yourselves. He walked to the window, watching raindrops trace patterns on the glass. Russell chose to embezzle company funds to impress his mistress. You chose to betray our marriage for cheap thrills with my business partner. I merely chose the consequence. Her phone buzzed, Russell's name flashing on the screen. Alexander smiled as she stared at it, panic rising in her eyes. You should answer that, he suggested. I imagine he has quite a lot to say about tomorrow's board announcement. Gloria's hands shook as she grabbed her phone, reading the string of increasingly frantic messages from Russell. This will destroy him, she whispered. That was the point. Alexander's voice held no trace of remorse. Did you really think you could flaunt your affair in my company, spend my money on your little escapades, and face no consequences? I'll fight you, she threatened weakly. Both of us will. Both of us? He laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Gloria, Russell's facing criminal charges for financial fraud. His assets are frozen, his reputation is ruined, and his wife's lawyers are circling. He won't be fighting anyone except prosecutors. The rain intensified outside, matching the storm of emotions crossing Gloria's face. Her phone buzzed again, another desperate message from Russell. He's being escorted out of the building as we speak, Alexander informed her. Security is quite efficient when properly motivated. Gloria stood on unsteady legs, her earlier confidence replaced by naked fear. What happens now? Now? Alexander returned to his desk, pulling out a thick envelope. Now you leave. The divorce papers are ready. Your things will be moved to storage, and your access to our accounts has already been terminated. You can't just… I can, and I have. He slid the envelope across the desk. The prenuptial agreement you so carelessly signed is quite specific about infidelity. You'll find the terms ungenerous. Gloria stared at the envelope, tears finally breaking through her composed facade. But Alexander saw no genuine remorse in them, only the realization that her carefully constructed world was collapsing. Why like this? She asked, her voice barely audible. You could have confronted us months ago. Alexander's expression remained impassive, because revenge, like business, requires patience and precision. You chose Russell because you thought he was the more powerful partner. I wanted you both to understand exactly how wrong you were. Her phone buzzed one final time. Russell again, but this time with news that made her sink back into the chair, all color draining from her face. Ah, Alexander noted her reaction. I see he's heard from Stephanie's lawyers. Timing is everything, isn't it? The rain continued its steady rhythm against the windows as Gloria realized the full magnitude of her choices. In one evening, she'd lost her marriage, her lifestyle, and the man she'd risked everything to be with. And Alexander, the husband she'd underestimated so catastrophically, simply watched her world burn with the same calm detachment he'd maintained throughout their entire charade of a marriage. The following morning dawned bright and merciless. Russell Maxwell's arrival at Lee and Maxwell Enterprises for the last time was captured by a dozen smartphone cameras. Security guards flanked the entrance, their presence a clear message to the disgraced executive. I'm sorry, Mr. Maxwell, the head of security, James, blocked his path. Your access has been revoked. Russell's face contorted with rage. This is my company. I built this. Not anymore. Jonathan Griffith emerged from the lobby, flanked by two corporate attorneys. The board's decision is final, Russell. Don't make this more embarrassing than it already is. Employees gathered at windows, watching their former CEO's meltdown. Russell's perfectly tailored suit couldn't hide the sweat staining his collar as he jabbed a finger at Jonathan. Where's Alexander? Too cowardly to face me himself? Mr. Lee is in a board meeting. Jonathan's tone remained professional, discussing the company's transition with our new partners, including Mrs. Maxwell. The mention of his wife's name hit Russell like a physical blow. Stephanie? What do you mean? She's been quite instrumental in stabilizing the foundation's future. Jonathan handed him a thick envelope. These are from her lawyers. Along with the divorce papers, you'll find a detailed accounting of your financial indiscretions. Russell's hands shook as he tore open the envelope. His face went from red to ashen as he read. This is impossible. These accounts were private. Nothing is private when you use company resources for personal gain. Jonathan checked his watch. A car is waiting to take you home. I suggest you use today to pack your office. Under supervision, of course. Inside the building, Marcy King watched from her office as Russell was escorted to collect his belongings. Her phone buzzed with a text from Alexander. Status? He's here. Starting to understand what he's lost. Good. Keep me updated. Down in the lobby, Gloria's attempt at damage control was meeting similar resistance. She'd arrived in last night's clothes, mascara smeared from tears, demanding to see Alexander. I'm sorry, Mrs. Lee. The receptionist's voice carried no sympathy. You've been removed from the authorized visitor list. Removed? Gloria's voice rose, drawing attention from passing employees. I'm his wife. Not for much longer. A familiar voice cut in. Kate stood by the security desk, her previous warmth replaced by cold satisfaction. Gloria, don't embarrass yourself further. Gloria spun to face her former friend. Kate, what are you doing here? Watching karma in action, Kate adjusted her visitor's badge, now marked with Legal Department. Those Wednesday night covers you needed? I passed every detail to Jonathan. My boyfriend found them quite interesting. The color drained from Gloria's face as the full scope of her isolation became clear. Even her closest confidant had been part of Alexander's web. You were spying on me? All those times I confided in you. All those times you bragged about fooling your husband? Kate's smile was razor-sharp. About how Alexander was too focused on work to notice. Guess he noticed more than you thought. Security approached as Gloria's voice rose to a shriek. Above, Russell watched from the conference room where he was packing his things, unable to help or even acknowledge her without making his situation worse. Meanwhile, in the main boardroom, Alexander sat with Stephanie Hopkins Maxwell, reviewing the foundation's new funding structure. The board has approved a 5-year commitment, he explained, sliding documents across the table. Your educational initiatives will be fully funded, independent of any changes in company leadership. Stephanie's hands were steady as she signed. I should have seen what Russell was doing. He fooled a lot of people. Alexander's tone held no judgment. The question is, what do you want to do now? Protect what I've built. Her voice hardened. Russell can lose everything else, but he won't take my foundation down with him. Their meeting was interrupted by commotion from the lobby. Through the glass walls, they could see Gloria being escorted out, her dignity in shreds as she screamed accusations at anyone who would listen. Hell hath no fury, Stephanie observed dryly. Like a gold digger scorned, Alexander finished, turning back to their papers. Now, about the new board structure. The day unfolded like a carefully orchestrated symphony of destruction. Russell's personal items were boxed and shipped to his soon-to-be former home. His executive parking space was reassigned. His name was removed from the company letterhead. By evening, social media buzzed with news of the power shift at Lee and Maxwell Enterprises. Business reporters speculated about the future of the Singapore project. Society columnists whispered about the twin divorces rocking Manhattan's elite. In his office, Alexander watched night fall over the city. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with messages, board members pledging support, employees expressing loyalty, reporters seeking comments. One message stood out from Gloria. I hope you're happy. You've destroyed everything. He typed back a single response. No, Gloria. You did that yourself. 2 months passed like a cleansing storm. The newly renamed Lee International's lobby showcased a fresh logo, all traces of the Maxwell name erased from the building's gleaming surfaces. Employees whispered about the changes, not with fear, but with a mix of awe and respect for the precision with which Alexander had executed his takeover. In his expanded corner office, Alexander reviewed the latest quarterly reports. The numbers told a story of recovery and growth. Investor confidence restored, stock prices stabilizing, the Singapore project restructured under competent management. A knock at his door revealed Marcy King, carrying a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses. "Thought you might want to celebrate." The SEC just closed their investigation into Russell's activities. Criminal charges? Alexander accepted a glass. Multiple counts of financial fraud. Marcy settled into the chair across from him. His lawyers are scrambling for a plea deal. The evidence was comprehensive. Alexander's lips curved in a slight smile. Jonathan is thorough. Speaking of thorough, Marcy set down her glass. Gloria's divorce was finalized this morning. Kate said she's moved in with her sister in Connecticut. Running away was always her specialty. Alexander turned to the wall of windows, watching his empire's reflection shimmer against the cityscape. "Have you seen today's society pages?" Marcy pulled up the article on her tablet. Double divorce drama. Manhattan power couples fall from grace. The photo showed Russell leaving court, aged years and months, dodging reporters while clutching a briefcase of legal papers. "Stephanie's foundation is thriving," she noted. "The new board appointment suits her. She earned it." Alexander's voice held genuine respect. Unlike some, she understood the value of building something real. His phone buzzed, an email from Jonathan. Russell's remaining assets had been seized. The man who'd helped build Lee and Maxwell Enterprises was now facing possible jail time. His reputation in tatters, his social standing destroyed. "You planned this perfectly," Marcy remarked, echoing the whispers that had circulated through corporate circles. Alexander turned back from the window. "Not planned," he corrected. "I just made sure I was prepared for anything. In business and in life, that's all we can do." A comfortable silence fell as they watched the city lights emerge against the darkening sky. Below, workers streamed out of the building, heading home to lives untouched by the drama that had unfolded in their corporate heights. "Do you regret any of it?" Marcy asked finally. "The way it ended?" Alexander considered the question, remembering Gloria's tear-streaked face as she'd packed her things, Russell's desperate attempts to salvage his reputation, the swift and merciless execution of a plan months in the making. "They made their choices," he said finally. "I simply ensured those choices had consequences." His computer chimed with a new message, the latest quarterly projections showing Lee International's strongest performance to date. Success, it seemed, was the sweetest revenge of all. "What now?" Marcy asked, refilling their glasses. "Now?" Alexander picked up the latest acquisition proposal his team had prepared. "Now we build something stronger. Something that can't be compromised by weak men or faithless wives." The city sparkled beyond his windows, a testament to power, ambition, and the careful calculation of a man who'd turned betrayal into triumph. His phone buzzed one final time. A message from Jonathan about another successful quarter, another victory in the endless game of corporate chess. Alexander smiled, knowing that sometimes the best revenge isn't served cold, but carefully invested. In the end, he hadn't just reclaimed his company. He'd rebuilt it into something greater, proving that true power lies not in the ability to destroy, but in the strength to rebuild from the ashes of betrayal. The night spread its dark wings over Manhattan, but in his office high above the city, Alexander Lee sat surrounded by the fruits of his calculated patience. He'd lost a wife and a business partner, but gained something far more valuable, the knowledge that in the game of love and business, the winner isn't the one who strikes first, but the one who strikes last. And as he reviewed the company's latest reports, watching the evidence of his success scroll across his screen, he knew that his revenge hadn't just been about punishment. It had been about transformation. Lee International would rise stronger, its foundation no longer compromised by the weak links of betrayal and deceit. The city lights twinkled beyond his office window, a constellation of possibilities stretching into the future. His phone buzzed with messages from board members, business partners, and employees, all aligned with his vision, all part of the new empire he'd forged from the ashes of betrayal. Alexander leaned back in his chair, a rare smile crossing his features. Sometimes, he reflected, the best revenge isn't just about destroying what was lost. It's about building something better in its place. And as the night deepened over his reformed kingdom, he knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter, one written entirely on his own terms. Epilogue. 5 years later. The Manhattan skyline had changed in 5 years, new towers reaching toward the clouds, but none stood quite as prominently as the gleaming headquarters of Lee International. The company's transformation from a partnership built on betrayal to a global powerhouse under Alexander Lee's sole leadership had become a Harvard Business School case study in corporate resilience. Inside his expanded office suite on the top floor, Alexander reviewed the latest acquisition reports. The company's market value had tripled since Russell Maxwell's dramatic fall, each success a testament to the truth Alexander had known all along. Some betrayals, handled properly, could become opportunities. A knock at his door revealed Jonathan Griffith, now Lee International's chief legal officer, and his wife Kate. Their marriage 2 years ago had been a smaller celebration of another victory, the union of two people who'd helped orchestrate one of Manhattan's most notorious downfalls. "Thought you'd want to see this," Jonathan said, placing a newspaper on Alexander's desk. The headline made him smile. Former executive Russell Maxwell denied early release. 3 years down, 2 to go, Kate noted, settling into one of the visitor chairs. The judge wasn't impressed by his appeal for leniency. Alexander scanned the article. Russell's fall had been spectacular and complete. After the SEC investigation revealed the full scope of his financial crimes, he'd accepted a plea deal, 5 years in a minimum security prison, complete asset forfeiture, and a lifetime ban from serving as an officer in any publicly traded company. "Any word from Gloria?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Kate's smile held a touch of satisfaction. Still hiding in Connecticut. Her sister finally kicked her out last year. Apparently, living off family charity gets old. She's working as a real estate agent now, trying to rebuild some kind of life. Her social media is enlightening. She pulled up Gloria's LinkedIn profile on her tablet. The woman who'd once graced Manhattan's most exclusive charity galas now advertised modest suburban homes, her designer wardrobe replaced by practical business suits from department stores. The prenuptial agreement Alexander had insisted upon had left her with exactly what she'd brought to the marriage. Nothing. She tried dating another executive last year, Jonathan added, until he Googled her name. Your story's become quite the cautionary tale in certain circles. Alexander's phone buzzed, a message from Marcy King, now his CFO and trusted second-in-command. The latest quarter's numbers had exceeded projections again. She'd proven invaluable in rebuilding the company's financial structure after Russell's schemes were untangled. Speaking of success stories, he turned his laptop to show them the stock ticker. Stephanie's educational foundation just partnered with the Gates Foundation. The board's decision to maintain funding was one of our best investments. Stephanie Hopkins, she dropped the Maxwell name immediately after the divorce, had transformed her personal humiliation into professional triumph. Her foundation now operated in 12 countries, its reputation enhanced rather than tainted by her ex-husband's disgrace. She'd remarried last year to a respected federal judge, their wedding featured in the same society pages that had once documented her divorce. Did you see Russell's latest appeal? Jonathan pulled out another document. He's claiming mental distress, says the shame and isolation have left him suicidal. Prison tends to have that effect, Alexander noted without sympathy. Especially on men who once had everything. The document detailed Russell's current circumstances. His assets seized, his reputation destroyed, his former friends and business associates treating his name like a contagion. Even after his release, the terms of his plea deal would prevent him from rebuilding any semblance of his former life. Gloria tried to visit him last year, Kate mentioned. He refused to see her. Apparently, he blames her for everything. Says if she hadn't pushed him to spend so lavishly on their affair, he wouldn't have needed to embezzle funds. Alexander smiled at the irony. They deserved each other. His intercom buzzed, his assistant reminding him of the board meeting. 5 years after the scandal, Lee International's board bore little resemblance to the one that had witnessed Russell's downfall. Alexander had carefully rebuilt it with people who shared his vision, his standards, his understanding that loyalty and competence were inseparable. "One more thing," Jonathan said as they stood to leave. Gloria's lawyer reached out again. "She's written some kind of memoir. Wants to know if you'd consider dropping the NDA clause in the divorce settlement." "Not a chance." Alexander's voice held no emotion. "She chose her story when she chose to betray our marriage. She doesn't get to profit from it now." After they left, he walked to his window wall, observing the empire he'd not just saved but exponentially expanded. The view reminded him of another evening 5 years ago, when he'd watched his wife and business partner's worlds burn. Now he watched his company's lights shine brighter than ever, each floor representing another level of success built on the ashes of their betrayal. His phone buzzed with a news alert. Russell Maxwell's latest business venture, a small consulting firm attempted after his first year in prison through a proxy, had filed for bankruptcy. Even from behind bars, Russell had tried to rebuild, using contacts from his glory days. But Alexander's influence ran deep. One quiet word from him had sent potential clients running. A second message followed, this one from a private investigator he still retained to monitor certain situations. Gloria's latest attempt at reinvention wasn't going well. Her real estate career in Connecticut barely covered her rent for a one-bedroom apartment in a decidedly unfashionable neighborhood. The investigator's photos showed a woman aged beyond her years, the expensive procedures and treatments she'd once taken for granted now far beyond her means. She'd tried dating within her new social circle, but her past followed her like a shadow. One Google search was all it took. The stories were everywhere. Manhattan's most notorious affair had its own Wikipedia page now, a cautionary tale of greed and consequence that made potential suitors vanish. A knock at his door revealed Marcy King, tablet in hand. The Singapore expansion is exceeding projections. Ironic, considering it was Russell's disaster there that helped us expose everything. Sometimes failure is the foundation for greater success, Alexander mused, gesturing for her to sit. Their weekly strategy sessions had become a cornerstone of Lee International's growth. Unlike Russell, Marcy understood that true power came from building, not taking. "Have you heard about Stephanie's latest project?" Marcy pulled up a presentation. Her foundation's educational initiative is revolutionizing access to STEM education in developing countries. The Gates Foundation partnership is just the beginning. Alexander nodded, remembering how Stephanie had transformed during the scandal's aftermath. She'd taken the remnants of her life with Russell, the social connections, the foundation he'd used as a tax shelter, and built something genuine. Her new husband, federal judge James Cornell, had proven the perfect partner in her renaissance. "The annual charity gala is next month," Marcy continued. "Stephanie hopes you'll attend. It's at the Metropolitan Museum again. The same venue where everything started falling apart for them," Alexander noted. The symmetry wasn't lost on him. 5 years ago, Russell and Gloria could barely look at each other there, knowing their world was crumbling. His computer chimed with an email from Jonathan, more developments in Russell's case. His appeal had been officially denied. The psychological evaluation had found his claims of mental distress genuine but not legally significant. The judge's comments were particularly cutting. "Mr. Maxwell's distress appears to stem not from genuine remorse, but from the consequences of his own actions." "Did you see his daughter's wedding announcement?" Marcy asked quietly. Alexander had. Russell's only child, Lauren Maxwell, had married last month. The announcement had pointedly mentioned only her mother, Stephanie, and new stepfather. Russell's name was conspicuously absent, his prison sentence making attendance impossible. Even his contribution to the wedding, what little he could still access of his money, had been declined. "The foundation is her main focus now," Marcy added. "Working with her mother, trying to salvage something positive from her father's disgrace." A notification lit up Alexander's phone, an alert from his building's security. Gloria had tried to enter the lobby again, claiming she had important documents for him. Like her previous attempts over the years, each more desperate than the last, this one ended with security firmly but politely escorting her out. "Still trying," Marcy observed. "Still failing," Alexander corrected. "Some lessons take longer to learn." His calendar reminder flashed. Dinner with Jonathan and Kate to celebrate their second anniversary. Their relationship, born from the ashes of betrayal, had flourished into something genuine. Kate's role in exposing Gloria's infidelity had earned her not just Jonathan's love, but a position of trust within Lee International's expanding legal department. The book deal rejection came through, Marcy mentioned, pulling up another email. Fourth publisher to pass on Gloria's memoir. Apparently, even with the NDA lifted, no one wants to touch a story that makes the author look this unsympathetic. Alexander smiled slightly. Karma writes better endings than any publisher. The city lights began to twinkle as dusk fell, each window in the surrounding towers a reminder of how far he'd come from that rainy night when he'd first seen the PI's photos. His empire had grown, strengthened by the very crisis that should have weakened it. The next morning brought news that made even Alexander pause. Russell Maxwell had attempted suicide in his prison cell. He'd survived, but the incident report painted a picture of a man finally broken by the weight of his choices. He left a note. Jonathan reported during their emergency breakfast meeting at the corner cafe, the same booth where they'd planned Russell's downfall 5 years ago. Mostly rambling, but he mentioned Gloria. Said she was the beautiful poison that destroyed everything he'd built. Alexander stirred his coffee, remembering the ambitious partner who'd helped build Lee and Maxwell Enterprises. Send flowers to Stephanie and Lauren. They may have divorced him, but they shouldn't hear about this from the media. Already done. Jonathan pushed a folder across the table. There's more. Gloria's sister finally talked to the press. Apparently, Gloria's been spiraling since losing her real estate license last month. Something about forging documents to inflate her sales numbers. Old habits, Alexander noted dryly. She never did understand that success requires more than just appearance. Their waitress, Janet, still serving after all these years, brought their usual orders. Saw your company's name in the papers again, Mr. Lee. Something about a new tech division? Alexander nodded, a rare smile crossing his features. Lee International's latest venture into artificial intelligence had captured headlines and investor attention. The stock had jumped 15 points overnight. The Singapore office sends their quarterly reports today, Jonathan mentioned after Janet left. The project Russell nearly destroyed is now our most profitable division. Sometimes I wonder if he follows the company's success from his cell. He does. Alexander pulled up an email on his phone. The prison psychiatrist reached out through proper channels. Apparently, Russell's obsessed with Lee International's stock ticker. Watches it daily in the prison library. The morning light caught the silver in Alexander's hair. Earned more from success than stress over the past 5 years. At 50, he'd become what Russell had only pretended to be. A true business titan, respected not for charm but for substance. His phone lit up with a message from Marcy. Look who's making headlines again. The attached link led to a small Connecticut newspaper. Gloria Edwards, former Manhattan socialite, had been arrested for drunk driving after causing a scene at her ex-boyfriend's engagement party. The article mentioned her past. Naturally, it always did. She tried reaching out to Russell's daughter last week, Jonathan added. Lauren blocked her number and reported her for harassment. Apparently, Gloria thought she could convince Lauren to support her book project. The real story of what happened? There's irony for you, Alexander mused. She finally wants to tell the truth, and nobody wants to hear it. Their conversation was interrupted by another message, this one from Stephanie. The Foundation's new educational center would open next month. Would Alexander do the honors at the ribbon cutting? The press would love the symmetry. The man who'd saved the Foundation from her ex-husband's misconduct helping launch its greatest achievement. Life has a way of sorting itself out, Alexander observed, typing his acceptance. Stephanie built something real. Gloria and Russell just built illusions. Later that evening, in his office high above Manhattan, Alexander reviewed a personal document he rarely opened. His original plan, drafted the night he'd first seen the PI's photos of Gloria and Russell. Every step had been there. The careful gathering of evidence, the strategic positioning of allies, the precise timing of each revelation. But the document's final page held something he'd never shown anyone. A list of possible outcomes for all involved. He'd predicted Russell's financial ruin, Gloria's social collapse, even the likelihood of attempted comebacks and reconciliations. What he hadn't predicted was how complete their destruction would be, how thoroughly their own choices would compound the consequences he'd set in motion. His intercom buzzed. His executive assistant's voice carried a note of urgency. "Mr. Lee? Mrs. Cornell is here. Stephanie says it's important." Stephanie entered his office looking every bit the sophisticated philanthropist she'd become. Marriage to Judge Cornell had erased the last traces of the uncertain woman she'd been as Russell's wife. "I thought you should hear this from me first," she began, taking a seat. "Russell's being transferred to the prison psychiatric unit. The suicide attempt, it's worse than they initially reported. The doctors say he's had a complete breakdown. Keeps talking about Wednesday nights and hotel rooms, about how he should have seen the signs." Alexander absorbed this silently, remembering another conversation in this office, years ago, when he'd promised Stephanie her foundation would survive Russell's downfall. "Lauren asked me to tell you something else," Stephanie continued. "She's legally changing her name. She wants no connection to Russell Maxwell anymore. The foundation will be her legacy now, not his shame." The city lights flickered to life outside his window as day faded into evening. Somewhere in Connecticut, Gloria was probably facing the consequences of her latest public meltdown. In a prison psychiatric ward, Russell Maxwell was finally confronting the true cost of his choices. And here, in the heart of the empire they tried to destroy, Alexander Lee sat with the woman who'd risen from the same ashes that had consumed them. "We all make choices," he said finally. "Some of us choose to build, others to betray. The difference is in living with the consequences." Stephanie smiled, understanding in her eyes. "You never just wanted revenge, did you? You wanted justice." "I wanted them to understand exactly what they'd thrown away," Alexander corrected. "The rest, they did to themselves." As night fell over Manhattan, Alexander Lee stood at his window, master of an empire built on the ruins of betrayal. Below, the city pulsed with life, each light a reminder that endings were just beginnings in disguise. He'd lost a wife and a business partner, but gained something far more valuable. Proof that sometimes the best revenge isn't just about destroying the old, but building something stronger in its place. His phone buzzed one final time. Jonathan, confirming tomorrow's board meeting. Another quarter, another success, another step forward while others remained trapped in the consequences of their past. In the end, Alexander reflected, true power wasn't in the ability to take revenge, but in the strength to transform it into triumph. The city lights twinkled like stars, each one a testament to the empire he'd built from betrayal's ashes, while somewhere in the darkness, two people who'd once thought themselves clever enough to deceive him faced the long, cold reality of their choices. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.